The afternoon sun poured through the tall glass windows of the international terminal, painting streaks of gold across the polished floors. Passengers hurried in all directions, some dragging heavy luggage, others clutching coffee cups and passports. Amid the noise of rolling suitcases and overhead announcements, a young woman walked quietly, unnoticed by everyone around her. Her name was Elena Ward. She wore a plain cream sweater, faded jeans, and sneakers that had clearly seen better days. A soft brown satchel hung over her shoulder, and her hair was tied back loosely. To the untrained eye, she looked like any other economy-class traveler heading home after a long trip. Nothing about her screamed wealth or status, and that was exactly how she wanted it. The boarding call for SkyVista Airlines Flight 801 echoed across the terminal. Passengers began lining up, business executives in suits, families with restless kids, and a few influencers snapping selfies in front of the boarding gate. Elena stepped quietly into the line, her boarding pass in hand. Row 5, Seat A, the attendant read aloud before scanning it. "Enjoy your flight, ma'am," Elena smiled softly. "Thank you." To most passengers, Row 5 meant an upgraded economy seat, comfortable but far from luxury. No one knew that the woman sitting there was the founder and owner of SkyVista Airlines itself. A billionaire with an empire spanning aviation, tech, and hospitality, she had built her fortune from nothing. But to her, the truest measure of success wasn't being served champagne in a private jet. It was seeing the world she created through the eyes of the people she served. Today, she was flying undercover, and again, every few months she traveled anonymously, blending with ordinary passengers, testing her company's service firsthand. It was how she kept her empire grounded in reality. As she stepped onto the aircraft, the flight attendants smiled warmly. One of them, a young woman named Lydia, greeted her with professional courtesy, though her eyes flickered briefly at Elena's modest attire. "Welcome aboard," Lydia said, forcing a polite smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Elena nodded and took her seat by the window. She loved that spot. It gave her a view of the engines, the sky, and the endless horizon. Around her, passengers settled in, chatting about business, vacations, and everyday worries. The cabin smelled faintly of fresh linen and jet fuel, but not everyone was as welcoming. A few rows behind, two passengers exchanged quiet remarks that weren't as quiet as they thought. "Some people can't even dress decently for a flight," one whispered, glancing toward Elena. "Probably used all her money just to buy a ticket," the other snickered. Elena heard them but didn't react. Years of media attention had taught her patience and the value of silence. As the plane began to taxi down the runway, the pilot's voice came over the intercom. "Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. This is Captain Reeves speaking. Welcome aboard SkyVista Flight 801 to Singapore. We're expecting clear skies ahead, so sit back, relax, and enjoy the flight." Elena closed her eyes, letting the soft hum of the engines calm her mind. This was her favorite part, takeoff. That moment when the ground fell away and the world below became a patchwork of color and clouds. It reminded her of why she'd built SkyVista in the first place, to give people the feeling of rising beyond limits. But the peace didn't last long. An hour into the flight, turbulence began to rattle the cabin. Drinks trembled in their cups and passengers clutched their armrests. The seatbelt sign blinked on. Elena stayed calm, her hands resting lightly on her lap. She'd been through worse, both in business and in the sky. However, one passenger, a wealthy-looking woman in designer clothes, began complaining loudly. "Excuse me?" she snapped at the flight attendants. "Why is this plane shaking so much? I demand to speak to the pilot." Lydia rushed over, trying to soothe her. "Ma'am, it's just a patch of turbulence." "Perfectly normal." "Normal?" The woman scoffed. "This airline used to be better. I paid for premium service, not this circus." Elena watched quietly, observing not just the passengers' temper but the crew's professionalism. Lydia's voice remained calm, but irritation flickered in her tone. Moments later, the turbulence eased. The cabin lights steadied, but the mood remained tense. Lydia moved down the aisle, still shaken from the confrontation, when her eyes caught Elena's simple outfit again. Perhaps she was looking for an outlet for her stress, or maybe arrogance just got the better of her. "Excuse me," she said sharply, leaning toward Elena. "Please make sure your tray table is locked and your seat is upright. We're still under safety protocol." Elena looked up calmly. "It is," she said softly. Lydia frowned, glancing at the table, then back at Elena's unbothered expression. Something about her composure rubbed her the wrong way. "Right," Lydia muttered under her breath. "Maybe next time dress a little more appropriately if you're going to sit this close to business class." Several passengers nearby glanced up, surprised by the tone. Elena's eyebrows lifted slightly, but her face remained serene. "I didn't realize attire was part of the safety protocol," she replied gently. Lydia's face flushed. I'm just saying it's good to maintain standards." Elena gave a polite nod, her calm smile never wavering. "Of course. Standards matter, especially in service." Her tone was mild, but something about the way she said it made Lydia blink, as though she'd just been quietly reprimanded. She moved on quickly, pretending to adjust another passenger's seatbelt. Elena turned back toward the window, watching the clouds drift by. The sky stretched endlessly, blue, powerful, free. Nobody on this plane had any idea that the woman in row 5 was the one who had designed those uniforms, approved that safety training, and personally signed off on the pilot's hiring. And soon, someone would find out. Because as fate would have it, a small technical issue in the cockpit was about to force the captain to make an unexpected announcement. One that would change the course of this flight, and reveal the identity of the woman who owned the sky. The plane had leveled off, cruising above the scattered clouds with a gentle hum that soothed most passengers. Elena sat quietly by the window, her gaze sweeping across the soft blue horizon. She had chosen this flight intentionally, not just to observe her airline service firsthand, but to test how her staff handled real situations without her presence being known. She had flown countless times like this, blending in with ordinary passengers, and had always been impressed by the professionalism of her crew. But today was different. An hour into the flight, a sudden announcement from the cockpit broke the usual calm. "Ladies and gentlemen," the captain's voice echoed clearly through the cabin speakers. "We have a minor technical issue requiring immediate confirmation from a senior SkyVista executive. Is there anyone on board with corporate authorization to advise us?" A murmur spread quickly among the passengers. A few exchanged glances, nervous, wondering what senior executive could mean. Some fidgeted in their seats while others whispered anxiously to companions. Elena's posture remained relaxed, her hands folded on her lap. She had expected this scenario, after all. Random technical checks sometimes required verification from the head office, and she had set this up beforehand to see how the staff would respond under pressure. However, a nearby flight attendant, Lydia, stiffened visibly. She had been slightly flustered earlier by Elena's calm demeanor and polite but pointed correction regarding airline standards. Now confronted with a call for a senior executive, she assumed that the request would be handled by someone from the corporate office or a passenger holding proper credentials. She didn't expect it to come from row 5. A few rows ahead, the wealthy woman who had been complaining earlier straightened in her seat, brimming with arrogance. "Surely they have someone on board," she muttered, her tone dripping with entitlement. Not that anyone like her could be of any help. She gave a dismissive glance toward Elena, who was still quietly observing the cabin. The captain's voice came again. "We really need verification for the override. Is there someone authorized from SkyVista available?" Elena slowly raised her hand, drawing a few curious stares. Her calm, composed presence contrasted sharply with the flustered crew and nervous passengers. "I can assist," she said softly, almost as though she were offering a courtesy rather than a revelation. The murmurs intensified. Passengers craned their necks to see who had spoken. Lydia, the flight attendant, walked briskly toward Elena, a mix of professionalism and apprehension on her face. "Excuse me, ma'am," she said cautiously. "Do you have credentials?" Elena smiled gently. "I believe my presence here will suffice." Lydia blinked, confused. I don't understand." At that moment, Elena produced a sleek, embossed ID card from her satchel. Not a generic boarding pass, but a corporate identification card with full authorization. The letters on the card shimmered subtly in the cabin light. Elena Ward, founder and CEO, SkyVista Airlines. A hush fell over the cabin. Passengers leaned forward, eyes wide. The wealthy woman's jaw dropped. The murmurs turned into audible gasps. She had laughed at Elena earlier, mocking her old clothes and modest appearance, never imagining that this seemingly ordinary girl was the very owner of the airline. Lydia stepped back, her face pale. You're the owner," she stammered. Elena nodded calmly. "Yes, and I can authorize the necessary override to assist the captain." The flight attendants froze, stunned into silence. They had trained for scenarios involving senior executives, but they had never expected the executive to be sitting quietly among passengers in row 5, blending in perfectly. The wealthy woman from earlier sputtered indignantly. I don't understand." You're her?" Elena turned her gaze toward her, serene and unshaken. "Appearances can be deceiving," she said softly. "What matters is competence, not clothes or seat location." By now the murmurs had spread to the entire cabin. Passengers whispered in astonishment, some snapping quick photos on their phones. A few business travelers exchanged incredulous looks. The plane that had been filled with tension and mild arrogance was now buzzing with awe and disbelief. The captain's voice came again, steady but tinged with respect. "Ms. Ward, thank you for coming forward. With your authorization, we can resolve the technical issue immediately." Elena spoke briefly to the captain, issuing the necessary permissions. Within moments, the cockpit buzzed with activity as the override was confirmed, and the minor technical problem was rectified. Passengers exhaled in relief, still glancing toward row 5, now fully aware of who had just handled the situation with unmatched calm and authority. Lydia, though still in shock, finally managed to approach Elena again. I apologize for doubting you earlier," she said, bowing slightly. "I didn't realize." Elena gave a small, forgiving smile. "It's understandable," she said. "People often judge what they see rather than what they don't." The wealthy woman, meanwhile, slumped in her seat, embarrassed and humbled. I shouldn't have," she muttered, avoiding Elena's gaze entirely. Elena ignored the snide glances and whispers, returning to her calm composure. She had anticipated these reactions, the sudden shift from mockery to awe, the astonishment that came with truth. And yet she didn't let it disturb her. She had learned long ago that power wielded gracefully was far more effective than power displayed loudly. Passengers continued to murmur in disbelief. "That's the owner?" one whispered. "The CEO herself just sitting there?" "Yes," another replied. "Row 5. And she handled the whole thing better than the staff." The remainder of the flight passed uneventfully, but the atmosphere had changed completely. Flight attendants were more attentive, passengers were more respectful, and whispers of admiration floated through the cabin. Elena sat quietly by the window, observing the clouds, her expression calm but thoughtful. She knew this moment was more than just a personal test. It was a lesson for everyone on the plane. True authority doesn't announce itself. It manifests in calm, decisive action. By the time the plane began its descent toward Singapore, the story of row 5 had already begun to spread quietly among the passengers. Phones buzzed as photos circulated, messages were exchanged, and some began posting on social media, sharing the incredible revelation. The unassuming girl they had overlooked for hours was the billionaire who owned the sky itself. Elena remained serene, watching the city lights of Singapore appear below the clouds. She had flown countless times anonymously, but this experience reminded her why she did it: to witness human nature, to test humility, and to see firsthand how her airline performed under scrutiny. And as the aircraft touched down smoothly on the tarmac, passengers erupted in applause, not just for the skilled landing, but for the remarkable woman in row 5 who had silently, effortlessly, commanded respect and admiration from everyone on board. The airplane had landed smoothly at Singapore's Changi International Airport, its wheels rolling firmly on the tarmac as passengers began unfastening their seatbelts. The cabin was abuzz with quiet chatter, but the whispers this time were different, filled with awe rather than curiosity, admiration rather than skepticism. Elena Ward, still seated in row 5, remained composed, her calm demeanor a stark contrast to the flurry of activity around her. Flight attendants moved efficiently down the aisles, helping passengers gather their belongings, but even they couldn't mask the subtle glances directed toward her. Lydia, the young attendant who had previously laughed at Elena's modest attire, paused for a moment, her face flushed with embarrassment. She had prepared herself for a routine landing, but the revelation that she had been serving the airline's owner, a woman she had underestimated entirely, rattled her more than she expected. Elena rose gracefully, slinging her satchel over her shoulder. "Thank you for your service," she said softly to the attendants, her tone polite yet carrying an authority that seemed to make everyone pause. Lydia swallowed nervously. Of course, ma'am. I apologize for earlier," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "I shouldn't have." Elena shook her head gently, her expression forgiving. "It's all right. Many people make assumptions. What matters is how we correct them," she said. Her words were measured, but they struck deep. There was no arrogance in her voice, only the quiet power of someone confident in herself and her values. Passengers began filing off the plane, but many stopped to steal glances at row 5. The murmurs escalated. "Did you see that?" "She's the owner," one man whispered. "She sat right next to us the whole flight, and we didn't even know," another passenger replied, shaking his head in disbelief. Even the wealthy woman who had complained about turbulence earlier avoided eye contact, her cheeks flushed with humiliation. She had assumed superiority based on clothing, demeanor, and appearance, and now realized she had judged entirely wrong. As Elena stepped down the aisle, she noticed how the flight attendants, usually busy and professional, were now acutely aware of her presence. They straightened instinctively, a blend of respect and awe in their expressions. One of the senior attendants approached her carefully. "Ms. Ward," she began, her voice steady but deferential. "Thank you for everything. I mean, for your guidance today and for reminding us what service really means." Elena smiled, a small, serene gesture. "You do an excellent job," she replied. "It's not about recognition, it's about care, attention to detail, and treating passengers as people, not numbers." The senior attendant nodded, visibly moved. I'll remember that." Outside the plane, the terminal was bustling. Ground staff, airport security, and the media had begun to notice the unusual attention in the boarding area. Rumors spread quickly. A billionaire had been on board, blending in among ordinary passengers. Elena's anonymity, a hallmark of her routine travels, had finally been pierced by circumstance. The pilot's call for corporate authorization, combined with the small technical issue, had inadvertently exposed her identity. A few photographers tried to capture her image, but she moved with deliberate calm, avoiding unnecessary attention. She understood the power of discretion, even as the world around her tried to immortalize the moment. Her presence alone had already left an impression on passengers and staff alike. As she walked toward the exit of the plane, several passengers approached her tentatively, their voices filled with a mixture of awe and apology. I want to say I'm sorry," one young man said nervously. "I judged you before the flight, and I shouldn't have. You handled everything so calmly. It was incredible." Elena's eyes softened. "Thank you," she said. "Remember, we often judge based on what we see on the surface. True understanding comes from patience and observation." Another passenger, an elderly woman, spoke up with admiration. "You're the owner of this airline, aren't you?" she asked, her tone polite but filled with astonishment. Elena nodded quietly. "Yes, I am. But my title doesn't define the way I treat others, nor does it excuse anyone from responsibility. Respect and integrity are earned, not assumed." The elderly woman smiled warmly. "You've taught us all a valuable lesson today." Even the wealthy woman who had mocked her earlier stepped forward, her earlier arrogance replaced by a humbled sincerity. "Ms. Ward," she stammered, I misjudged you. Please forgive my behavior." Elena gave her a gentle nod. Acknowledging it is the first step. Learning from it is the next. By the time passengers disembarked, Elena had quietly navigated the aisles, offering kind words and subtle guidance wherever needed. She had turned what could have been an embarrassing or humiliating flight into a lesson in humility and respect. Once on the tarmac, she paused for a moment, gazing at the gleaming fuselage of the plane. SkyVista Airlines was her creation, a reflection of years of dedication, vision, and tireless work. But today wasn't about profits, expansion, or corporate strategy. It was about connection. It was about reminding everyone that authority and power were not about appearance, wealth, or titles, but about character, composure, and empathy. Her personal assistant, who had been waiting discreetly near the stairs, approached her with a tablet in hand. "Ms. Ward, the media outside is already picking up the story. Photos, videos, social media posts. The news is spreading fast." Elena took a deep breath, maintaining her calm exterior. let it spread. But the focus shouldn't be on me or my wealth. It should be on the service, the people, and the integrity of this airline. Her assistant nodded. Understood. But people are fascinated. They've never seen a CEO act like this. Elena allowed herself a faint smile. Then they'll remember what leadership truly looks like. It's not in appearances nor in extravagant displays. It's in action, humility, and respect for others. The airport terminal outside the plane was abuzz with reporters, passengers recounting their experiences, and airline staff gossiping in quiet tones. Word of the girl in row 5 who owned the Sky spread like wildfire. Her story became a viral sensation within hours, not for scandal nor for drama, but for the quiet, commanding presence she had exhibited. As Elena stepped into the waiting car that would take her to her temporary residence in Singapore, she reflected on the events of the flight. From being underestimated and mocked, to subtly asserting authority and teaching lessons in humility, she had navigated the complex social dynamics with skill and grace. The experience reaffirmed her belief that true power is exercised quietly, through competence and empathy, rather than intimidation or wealth display. Even within her own company, Elena knew that this flight would leave a lasting impression. Flight attendants, crew members, and even passengers would talk about it for months, perhaps years. But she didn't care about fame or recognition. She cared about integrity, observation, and ensuring that people were treated with dignity regardless of appearances. That evening, as she watched the Singapore skyline from the hotel suite, Elena reflected on the subtle changes that had occurred among the passengers and staff. She had witnessed human behavior in its rawest form: prejudice, arrogance, humility, and awe, all coexisting within the confines of a single flight. And she knew one thing with certainty: this was only the beginning. SkyVista Airlines had not only delivered passengers safely to their destination, it had delivered a lesson in humility, respect, and the quiet power of composure. Elena leaned back in her chair, letting the golden city lights wash over her, and allowed herself a rare moment of satisfaction. The girl in row 5 had not just survived scrutiny and mockery. She had transformed it into an unforgettable demonstration of authority and grace, leaving an indelible mark on everyone who had witnessed it. The next morning, Singapore's Changi Airport was alive with chatter about the previous day's extraordinary events. Social media platforms were flooded with images, videos, and personal accounts of the girl in row 5 who owned the Sky. News outlets scrambled to confirm her identity, while passengers shared their awe at witnessing a billionaire blend seamlessly with ordinary travelers. For Elena Ward, however, the whirlwind outside was just background noise. Her focus remained clear. She had witnessed the true reactions of people when faced with the unexpected, and there were lessons here that extended beyond a single flight. Elena began her day at the SkyVista Airlines regional office, a sleek glass building that reflected the morning sun. She moved through the corridors quietly, observing employees in their natural state. Receptionists greeted her politely, unaware she was the company's CEO. Flight coordinators discussed scheduling. Pilots exchanged technical updates, and customer service representatives dealt with passenger inquiries. Yet what caught her attention most was the subtle change in energy among the staff who had been on Flight 801. Lydia, the young flight attendant who had laughed at Elena's attire, now approached her with careful respect. "Ms. Ward," she began hesitantly, I wanted to apologize again for yesterday. I judged you unfairly, and it was wrong." Elena offered a gentle smile. "Thank you, Lydia. Recognizing it is the first step. Now it's about moving forward with integrity and understanding. Our job isn't about appearances. It's about ensuring every passenger feels respected and safe." Lydia nodded, her demeanor humbled. "I understand. I'll make sure the crew learns from this." Elena's calm confidence and clear guidance immediately resonated with the staff. She spent the morning conducting an impromptu meeting, but rather than asserting authority through lectures or corporate jargon, she focused on human behavior, humility, and empathy. She spoke about the assumptions people make, the subtle ways bias manifests, and the transformative power of quiet composure. Her words weren't just lessons for the flight attendants. They were principles for anyone interacting with the public. Meanwhile, the viral story of Row 5 continued to grow online. News articles highlighted how a seemingly ordinary young woman had demonstrated leadership, intelligence, and calm under pressure, leaving passengers and crew in awe. Many commentators were astonished that someone with the wealth and influence of Elena Ward could choose anonymity over extravagance, humility over recognition. The narrative of her quiet authority captured imaginations worldwide, inspiring people to reflect on their own judgments and behavior. By midday, Elena received messages from passengers of Flight 801. Some expressed awe and gratitude. Others shared apologies for earlier snide comments. There were messages from aspiring flight attendants, eager to learn from her example, and even from seasoned pilots acknowledging her unique approach to leadership. Elena read each one thoughtfully, replying where she could with polite, encouraging words. She knew that impact was measured not by wealth but by influence and example. Later, a private meeting with the regional SkyVista management team was held. Elena addressed them directly, discussing improvements for passenger interaction, safety protocols, and corporate culture. But more than operational changes, she emphasized the lessons from her recent flight. Respect isn't granted by position or title, she told them firmly. It is earned through action, empathy, and the way you treat others in everyday moments, especially when no one is watching. Her speech resonated deeply. Managers and staff, accustomed to conventional corporate hierarchies, realized that leadership extended far beyond executive offices or public statements. Leadership was in the quiet, thoughtful interactions, in responding with calm intelligence under pressure, and in choosing humility over pride. That afternoon, Elena visited the crew lounge, where staff who had served on Flight 801 were gathered. She moved quietly among them, observing, listening, and offering subtle guidance. One young attendant expressed regret for underestimating her during the flight. Elena simply nodded and replied, "Mistakes are opportunities to learn. What matters is what you do next." Her words sparked a transformation among the crew. Confidence replaced uncertainty, humility replaced arrogance, and teamwork replaced indifference. Elena's quiet example had demonstrated a truth that could not be taught through manuals or training sessions, that human respect and trust are cultivated through behavior, not status. Meanwhile, passengers from the flight began posting videos online, recounting how Elena handled the situation with poise and authority. Social media influencers amplified the story, highlighting her calm demeanor, intelligence, and the subtle way she had corrected the assumptions of both staff and passengers. Memes, articles, and discussion threads spread rapidly, often focusing on the dramatic contrast between her modest attire and her immense influence. The viral attention did not sway Elena. She continued her day with composed diligence, reviewing flight reports, safety audits, and passenger feedback. She checked the maintenance logs and spoke directly to engineers about safety procedures. Each action reflected a philosophy she had always believed in. True leadership is not performative. It is grounded, consistent, and attentive to the smallest details. By evening, Elena returned to her temporary residence in Singapore. From the balcony, she observed the city lights flickering like a constellation mirrored on Earth. The events of the day had been extraordinary, yet she remained introspective. She realized that influence is most potent when exercised subtly, without fanfare, and with genuine consideration for those affected. The lesson of Row 5 was not simply about revelation, but about the enduring impact of calm intelligence, humility, and quiet authority. That night, as she prepared for bed, her assistant approached with a tablet. "Ma'am, the media coverage is unprecedented. Interviews, profiles, and feature stories are emerging worldwide. Everyone is talking about your flight and the viral story." Elena smiled faintly, not with vanity but with understanding. "Let them talk," she said softly. "Stories can inspire, but actions, not words, are what truly change people." The following morning brought new opportunities to solidify the lessons learned. Elena arranged a workshop for SkyVista employees, focusing on passenger engagement, conflict resolution, and humility in service. Using her personal experience as the central example, she demonstrated how subtle composure and decisive action could transform tense situations into positive outcomes. Crew members were attentive, eager to absorb her insights, and inspired to elevate their own performance. Passengers and staff alike began to adopt a new perspective, one that recognized the value of quiet confidence, humility, and respect. Elena's example became a benchmark for behavior, not only within SkyVista Airlines but across social media, inspiring thousands of viewers worldwide. By the end of the week, SkyVista Airlines had undergone a subtle but profound transformation. Employees treated each passenger with increased care and attentiveness, influenced by the story of Row 5. Airline executives began implementing protocols that encouraged humility, observation, and empathy in every interaction. And while Elena remained largely unseen by the public eye, her impact reverberated through every flight, every crew meeting, and every passenger interaction. Yet, despite all the attention and praise, Elena remained grounded. She continued to travel anonymously when possible, observing, learning, and testing her airline's operations in real-world conditions. Row 5 had not been a one-time spectacle. It was a reminder of how true influence is measured. By actions, not appearances; by behavior, not wealth, and by the quiet authority of composure under pressure. As she looked over the skyline once more, Elena felt a profound sense of purpose. Her actions had not only taught lessons to passengers and staff, but had also reminded her of the core philosophy she had built her airline upon: that the sky belongs not just to billionaires, but to those who navigate it with respect, intelligence, and grace. And from the shadows of Row 5, she silently prepared for the next journey, the next flight, the next opportunity to quietly influence, guide, and inspire. Days after the viral story of Row 5, the world still buzzed with amazement. Social media feeds overflowed with accounts of the quiet, unassuming woman who had shocked passengers, crew, and a billionaire-level public with nothing but her poise, intelligence, and understated authority. Elena Ward's identity as the billionaire owner of SkyVista Airlines became the focal point of countless articles, videos, and discussion threads, yet she remained largely anonymous in her personal movements, observing the ripple effect of her actions quietly. Even within SkyVista Airlines, the changes were profound. Flight attendants who had once relied solely on rote training now approached every passenger interaction with mindfulness, empathy, and attentiveness. Crew meetings regularly included exercises on observation, humility, and handling difficult passengers without losing composure. Elena had personally overseen a series of workshops, drawing from the Row 5 experience, to instill a culture where respect and dignity were prioritized over hierarchy and appearance. Lydia, the young flight attendant who had previously underestimated Elena, now stood transformed. She approached each passenger interaction with care and professionalism, often reflecting on her behavior during Flight 801. She had learned firsthand that assumptions based on appearances could be disastrously misleading, and that authority was measured by action, not by costume or uniform. Meanwhile, Elena continued to travel discreetly, blending into ordinary flights and observing operations firsthand. Row 5 had been a test of sorts, but the lessons it imparted resonated in ways she had not anticipated. She saw ordinary passengers showing renewed patience, crew members demonstrating heightened professionalism, and even other airline staff taking subtle cues from her example. Every day, the influence of Row 5 expanded like a ripple across a vast ocean, touching countless lives in ways both visible and invisible. Beyond the airline, the story sparked conversations worldwide about humility, leadership, and respect. Public forums, university classes, and leadership seminars referenced her actions. Many marveled that a billionaire, someone who could live in lavish luxury and wield immense power, had chosen to maintain anonymity, demonstrating that the essence of leadership is not in wealth, but in wisdom and empathy. Elena's own reflection on the events was equally profound. Sitting quietly in her suite one evening, she gazed out at the city skyline shimmering in the golden light of dusk. She considered the passengers who had judged her by her clothes, the flight attendants who had faltered under minor stress, and the broader public who had never expected such quiet authority to come from Row 5. It was a lesson she knew would stay with her forever. True power is exercised through subtlety, empathy, and unwavering composure, not by demands or ostentation. But Row 5's influence was not limited to observation and reflection. The viral attention and public admiration created opportunities for Elena to positively affect others directly. Schools invited her to speak about leadership and humility. Aviation academies requested her guidance in training programs. Even aspiring entrepreneurs sought mentorship, inspired by her example of understated authority and competence. She shared insights not by flaunting wealth, but through stories and practical demonstrations of patience, resilience, and ethical decision-making. Within SkyVista Airlines, Elena's leadership inspired a new operational philosophy. Flight attendants and crew members began initiating small gestures of respect, attentively helping elderly passengers, addressing minor complaints with patience, and maintaining calm under pressure. The passengers who flew SkyVista noticed the difference, leading to increased satisfaction and a new wave of brand loyalty. The airline's reputation for exemplary service skyrocketed, not through flashy marketing but through the quiet, consistent culture Elena had cultivated, a culture seeded during the events of Row 5. The wealthy passenger who had mocked Elena's attire that day had also experienced a transformation. Initially embarrassed and reluctant to face her, she later approached Elena during another flight to apologize formally. Elena accepted the apology with grace, reinforcing the lesson that mistakes, humility, and acknowledgement could coexist with respect. The encounter became a talking point among airline staff, reinforcing the ethos that judgment based on superficial perception was a trap to avoid. Elena herself continued to embrace simplicity in her personal life, understanding that luxury or extravagance were not measures of character. She traveled in unassuming clothing, stayed in modest accommodations when appropriate, and maintained the anonymity that allowed her to observe human behavior authentically. She had discovered that real leadership and influence came from action and example, not titles or appearances. Months later, SkyVista Airlines held a special company gathering to recognize exemplary staff. Elena attended discreetly, observing as awards were handed out for courage, problem-solving, and outstanding customer service. Crew members who had been on Flight 801 were singled out for their adaptability under pressure, and Elena personally commended them, not only for technical performance but for demonstrating empathy and composure in challenging situations. The media continued to cover the story, often portraying Elena as the invisible billionaire, a woman whose actions spoke louder than her fame or wealth ever could. Yet she remained focused, always prioritizing impact over attention. Interviews she gave were measured and thoughtful, emphasizing lessons about humility, respect, and human dignity rather than personal accolades. Through all of this, Elena's philosophy became increasingly clear. Leadership is measured not by commands or recognition, but by the quiet influence you exert through action, integrity, and empathy. The story of Row 5 became a permanent testament to that philosophy, a reminder that appearances are deceiving, judgment is often premature, and quiet courage can command far more respect than flamboyant displays of power. Years later, Row 5 remained legendary among passengers and airline staff alike. Stories were shared during training sessions, inspiring new generations of flight attendants, pilots, and managers. Elena's name became synonymous not with wealth alone, but with wisdom, calm authority, and the power of subtle influence. She had transformed a moment of mockery and underestimation into a lasting legacy, one that proved true respect and authority are earned quietly, through composure, empathy, and action, rather than superficial displays of status. Elena Ward, the girl in Row 5, had not only owned the airline, she had owned the lesson. She had demonstrated that impact is timeless when rooted in integrity, humility, and quiet brilliance, and the world had taken notice. Passengers, staff, and admirers alike would carry that lesson with them long after the flight ended. As the sun set over Singapore, painting the sky with streaks of orange and gold, Elena looked out once more from her hotel balcony. She reflected on how a single flight, a single seat, and a single moment of calm had altered perceptions, inspired countless individuals, and reinforced the power of humility. The legacy of Row 5 would endure, not because of viral fame, but because it revealed the true measure of authority and the quiet strength of character. And with that, Elena turned away from the balcony, ready to continue her journey, navigating both the skies and the world with the same unwavering grace and quiet power that had defined Row 5.